Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Do be seated. It is a huge thrill for me to be here with you this morning because over 5 years ago, I was contacted as being connected with the Lee Tim Oy Foundation in England by Betty Tullis, who told us about this window and wanted us to know about it, and I was even invited to come over for the dedication, but I couldn't make it. But here I am now, and I want to thank Bishop Patrick so much for your invitation to come here today, and thank you for your warm welcome. And it's also a huge delight, an unexpected delight, to see Bishop Victoria, who for many, many years has been such an encouragement to us in the Church of England as we walked forward a very long and at times painful journey towards not only women priests, but allowing women to become bishops. When I tell you there was a 20-year gap between the Church of England doing all the theology for women to be ordained as priests, and then taking another 2 decades to say, oh, but then can they really be bishops? And Bishop Victoria came numerous times and was wonderful. And I must thank also Aaron, who is giving me the most warm welcome and hospitality. So it's very good to be here. Now, today is the last Sunday in Epiphany, and we move from the incarnation story, of course the Epiphany, Candlemas, and all of that, with Jesus' entry into the world as a human, one of us. And then we move next Tuesday to Shrove Tuesday, and of course the beginning of Lent, when another season starts, and it really is the slow drumbeat that begins to begin, silent and muffled at first, towards the Passion Week, and then the ultimate resurrection of Jesus Christ. So that's what we're at. We're at a time of change. And I'd like to suggest that the readings we have just heard offer such an important teaching to us. And what it teaches us, if we look at the Exodus story of Moses, we see that Moses went up a mountain to be with God, to listen to God. And then we go to the Gospel of Luke, and we see Jesus going up a mountain to be with God. He's also joined by Moses and Elijah. Did you know that Moses and Elijah make an appearance in the New Testament? Briefly, and rather strange circumstances, but they're there. And then at the end of that extraordinary moment, God comes out of the cloud, just as God did at Jesus' baptism, and says, "This is my beloved Son." And at the baptism, it was, "In whom I am well pleased." But this time he says, "Listen to him." Now, how do we listen? We only listen if we are with someone. And cutting through all the very worthy churches, programs, and initiatives, and plans, and everything else which do good and have, in some cases, really positive, lasting benefits. But what we forget in our busyness and in our desire to do something more for God and do something more for outreach and get it right and do more, is we I believe, and I'm speaking for not just the Church of England, but I think many Christian churches, I believe we have forgotten how to listen to God. And in both cases, Moses went apart up to the mountain and came back with what we now know as the Ten Commandments and other commandments. And Jesus went up the mountain and then had that absolutely extraordinary transformation. And of course, this is called the Transfiguration. What that means is a change for the better, something completely made better, made more. And then in both cases, there is Moses coming down from the mountain with his face shining, so dazzling, that he has to put a veil over it. Otherwise, he's blinding the people. And there is Jesus, who turns dazzling white for a time. But then, if we go to what Paul wrote to the church in Corinth, he picks up the theme of Moses. And he says, the veil, and he's talking about the veil, but Moses may have had a physical veil to hide his glowing face. But Paul is talking about a spiritual veil, how the veil occludes and hides people's closer presence with God. And Paul says, if we turn to Christ, we have unveiled faces, and we turn to him, and we become more and more, by degree, turned into his likeness. That is an extraordinary claim. We, with unveiled faces, those who follow Christ, become, degree by degree, as we spend time with God, as we listen to Christ, we become more like him. More like him. Do we really dare to believe that? Can we dare to believe that if I spend time with God, I can actually become more like Christ? And out of me will shine that dazzling light that will not only transform me, but transform those with whom I meet and engage. Please, read it again. Read those passages and dare to believe. This is what is happening to you. But take time to go apart and be with God. Now, going to Florence Lee Tim Oy, and the light is actually so dazzling, I can hardly look at her and Desmond Tutu, it's wonderful, is that she was a person that we look at her life and we can see how degree by degree she became more in the likeness of Christ. And some of you here may have met her, may have known her, and her sister Rita Lee Chu, who lived here and was married to a Canadian. And this is where Florence Lee Tim Oy died. And we marked the anniversary of her death, the 33rd anniversary of death, last week. And so Florence started off in a large family of very, very modest means. But when she heard a priest asking a group of people, is there a Chinese woman who is called to preach the gospel? She felt inside something stirring, and she said, Lord, I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to be that person. And from then on, that was her focus. And she was a very modest person. She was not a loud person, not a colorful person, but wherever she went in her ministry, she changed people. And I can give you one example, is that because she had been born into a Christian family, her parents were delighted when she was born. And Tim Oy means much beloved. But at that time, when a woman was in labor, there was always the option of having a bowl of ash by the bedside, so that if the baby was a little girl, she could be smothered. Because girls were not valued, but little boys were. But her parents wanted her and called her much beloved. And so one of her postings was to a parish near the Vietnamese border. And there she ministered in a large maternity hospital. And what she did is transform the culture of valuing boys and not valuing girls, and taught them and did away with that in that whole community. And that practice stopped because of her ministry and her quiet, steady love and teaching of the way of Christ. And so she went on through her life doing many things like that. And as Bishop Patrick said, that afterwards I'm happy to talk about her and tell you more, but I would like to just mention a few stories of what is now being done in her name, what her legacy is. She could not have imagined this. You know, she said, some people shine like diamonds. I know I'm not a diamond, but, you know, by the grace of God, I am led and I do what I can. What she didn't understand is that for other people, she was that diamond. She did shine because of her willingness to face Christ with no veil across her face and to do as she was called to do. And when she died in 1992, her sister and the son of the bishop who ordained her, it was Bishop Hall and his son, Canon Christopher Hall in England, got together and said, what can we do in her honor? And with their incredible provenance, the son of the bishop and the sister of Florence, they said, well, if it hadn't been for her parish, who gave her the money so that she could attend theological seminary, she would never have been able to be trained and go on and be ordained. So they said, let's set up a foundation that will give grants to Anglican women around the entire Anglican communion, around the world, who have everything going for them, the drive, the vision, the call. They just don't have the wherewithal to follow that calling, to make it happen. And so we have given out over 800 grants to over 800 women who are now serving as priests and lay ministers and people in their communities doing a range of things. And when I tell you that these women not only carry on the transformation, the transfiguration of people's lives in their communities and churches, but at times they also save people. And let me give you, as Florence did, with the practice of doing away with the bowl of ash. I'll just tell you about one woman who I've met twice. Once when she came to a conference in England, and once when she was back in Kenya in her rural diocese, and I was able to meet her about a year after I'd met her in England. When I met her in England, her name is the Reverend Purity Munyeri, from a remote rural diocese in Kenya, in a beautiful, lush area, where elephants come into your garden at night and trample all your nice plants. And when I met her in England, I said, and I like asking the women these questions, I said, Purity, what are the issues for some of the people in your congregation? Because that usually ends up with such an interesting answer that I learn instantly about their culture and what the women are dealing with. And she was quiet for a while. She paused. And then she said, well, it's really the teenage girls. And my instant thought, to my shame, was, oh, what are the teenage girls doing now that is so exercising poor purity? And I said, well, what's going on? And she said, well, really, I have been doing so many funerals because we have been through a time of drought. It's a rural area, agricultural, and for 2 years the crops have failed. And the farming families have no money, not enough food, and they are selling off their younger daughters to older men who will pay good money for a young girl. And so these girls are sold out of their family, and within a short matter of time, they're either pregnant and they are in a relationship that is not founded on love, and some of the customs are very damaging to women in that culture. And they're turned into lackeys, servants, and very badly mistreated. So these girls have 1 or 2 children. Their husbands may still be mistreating them, or their husbands may have left. They cannot go back to their families because once a girl is sold by her family, she carries a stigma. It's so unfair. She carries a stigma that she was sold. So she's lost her family, she's lost her neighborhood, she's lost her friends, she's all alone with a man who mistreats her and with dependents, and there isn't enough to go around. And so, one by one, these girls were killing themselves, and often killing their children first. And Purity was taking funeral after funeral after funeral. I was speechless. Fast forward nearly a year, and I was in her diocese in Kenya, meeting with some of the women who had received grants and just seeing how they're doing. And I wanted to check up on Purity. And she came over to the place where I was staying, and I almost dared not ask. And I said, Purity, how is it going in your parish? And she was a completely transformed person herself. She smiled and she said, well, I have been preaching to my congregation, and I have told them there is no stigma on these girls. They are precious, and they have been victims of circumstances. No stigma. We take them into our families, we take in their children, we get the girls back into full-time education, and we love them, and we become their family. And her congregation started to do that. And she said, there are no more funerals. What a transformation. What an extraordinary ministry. And Purity was able to hold her position because she was able to study theology, become ordained, and then given the position of responsibility of a large parish in her diocese. And so I get to see this firsthand. I get to hear these stories of transformation, of change. I get to see these women whose lives shine with the glory of God, whose lives shine with the compassion and the courage of Christ. And so I would like to end by saying, remember, stay unveiled, face Christ, and let his love penetrate into you, and spend time with God.